Tic Tac Toe is a common React interview question that even experts struggle with, but you don't have to. Let's take a look at the requirements. We want a 3x3 grid with 9 clickable tiles. X has the first turn, then the turns alternate between O and X. The game has 3 outcomes. Either X wins or O wins, or it is a tie. To win the game, we need to have 3 of the same characters in a line. The line can be horizontal, vertical, or diagonal. The game is a tie when all the tiles are filled up and neither character has 3 in a row. When the game ends, the user should be shown a message regarding the outcome. Finally, we want a reset button that empties the board and sets the turn back to X. You are watching The Helpful Coder, and let's get into the code. Let's start by importing React, creating an empty component called Tic Tac Toe, and exporting the component as the default. Now, in the return section of our component, we are going to return a div, and within it, a grid. The grid will be used to display the tic-tac-toe board. Next, in our CSS file, we're going to add some simple styles to our grid to help make it look like what we want. The grid template columns is important here. It decides the number of columns in our grid. In the repeat function, the 3 tells our grid to have 3 columns, and the 1fr tells each column to have the same width. Back in our React file, we will use the grid styles. I'm using Next.js and I'm using its default way to import styles. This might look slightly different for you. Okay, time to get into the functionality. To store the state of the board, we will use a first React hook, the useState hook. This hook lets us add state variables to our component. State variables are like a component's memory. They help our component remember and keep track of things. The syntax of the useState hook is as follows. There are 3 key parts. The first is the variable board. This will store the current state of the board. Next is the variable setBoard. This is a function and will be used to update the board state variable. Finally is the default value. For a board, it will be an empty array with 9 null values. Each item in the array represents a tile on the board. The 0th index represents a 0 tile. The first index represents the first tile, and so on. At the start, all the values are null. As the tiles on the board start getting marked, the array updates to store these values. Back in our code, let's display this board. Now, within our grid, we will map through our board, and for each element, return a div. To each div, we're going to add a key. The value of the key will be the index. There is a chance your interviewer might ask you about this. Typically, I would not recommend using the index as the key. This is because keys help React render elements more efficiently, especially when data in our components change or they get re-rendered. Keys in React should be something unique to the data. But in our case, the only unique thing is the index. Another factor to keep in mind is our grid is not going to be rearranged. Thus, using the index as the key is okay for the tic-tac-toe board. Now, within the div, if the value of the grid position is not null, as in it has an X or an O, we will display it in a paragraph tag. To make our grid kinder to the eyes, I've added some basic styling to the tiles and the text within it, including borders to the right and the bottom. I've applied the style to the div, as well as fixed a small typo. Looking at our output, we now have something that resembles a board, but it looks like we have some extra borders to the right and to the bottom. We can fix this with some quick CSS. We will be using the CSS selector nth-child to select all the items in the rightmost column of our grid, and we will use the selector with the input 3n. This will select all tiles where the index is multiples of 3. The grid itself is first indexed. This selector will select the 3rd, 6th and 9th tiles, which are the rightmost tiles, and will then update them to have no right border. We will use the same selector to target the last row, individually selecting the 7th, 8th and 9th tiles to have no bottom border. Running this code, we now have a well-formatted board. For quick bonus points, we will add a class called tileEmpty with the hover selector and update its cursor to be a pointer. Now back in our React code, we will apply this tile when the value of our tile is null. Alright, now our cursor changes to a pointer when we hover over an empty tile. Okay, let's now focus on being able to fill tiles. The first step here is to know whether we want to fill the tile with an X or an O. To keep track of this, we will use the useState hook again. The variable turn will store X or O. setTurn will be used to update the value of turn, and the default value will be X. This is because X has the first move. Now, to actually fill tiles, we will add a function called onEmptyTileClick. We want this to run, as you guessed it, when an empty tile is clicked. The function will take in one prop, the index of the tile we want to update. I will write the code first, then break it down for you. The setBoard function, which is used to update our board, also accepts a function as a prop. The syntax of the function is as follows. The variable prev is the previous board, and the value that is returned will be the new board. Our return value here is a map function on the previous board. It loops through the previous board, checking the index. If the index matches the index of the tile we want to update, we update its value to a turn state variable. And for all other indexes, it returns the existing value. Once the board is updated, we want the next turn to be the other player. If X just went, we want O to go next, and if O just went, we want X to go next. We will use a setTurn function for this. I will write the code, then break it down. Prev is the previous turn. It will either be X or O. If the previous turn is X, we want the next turn to be O. If the previous turn is not X, it is O, and we want the next turn to be X. Okay, our function is complete. Let's use it. In the onClick handler of our tiles div, we will use this function only if our tile is empty and pass into it the index of the tile. And now looking at our output, we can start filling in our tic-tac-toe board. You know what this means? We are getting close to the end. And if you're finding this video helpful, you can help me by liking this video and subscribing. Next, we need our code to find out if someone has won the game. This might seem complicated at first, but there is a simple trick to it. Our board is small, it's only 3x3 tiles, and being so small, there are only a limited ways to win this game. Namely, there are 8. Let's quickly go through them. First are the columns. A player can win the game by having their characters down a whole column. Looking at the leftmost column, we can see that if a user marks a tile indexes 0, 3 and 6, they have 3 in a row and they win the game. Similarly, if they mark the tile indexes 1, 4 and 7, they also get 3 in a row and they win the game. And again, 2, 5, 8 is the index list to win the game by marking the last column. You can see, by knowing the winning indexes, our app can check if someone has won the game. Let's go through the remaining winning patterns. To get the top row is 0, 1, 2. The middle row is 3, 4, 5. And the bottom row is 6, 7, 8. And the diagonals, they are 0, 4, 8 and 2, 4, 6. I have stored these patterns in an array called winning patterns. Now we will check for a winner every time the board is updated. To do this, we will leverage a React hook called useEffect. The hook has two key parts: the logic and the dependency list. The logic is the function that runs when the hook is triggered. The dependency list is what triggers the hook to run. Every time an item on the dependency list changes, the logic of the hook runs. In our dependency list, I have put our board. This means that every time our board updates, the logic will run. Now for the logic, we want to check if someone has won, and if yes, alert the users. Let's start by looping through our winning patterns. For each pattern, we have 3 indexes. We will get the values our board has at these 3 indexes. Finally, if all the values are the same, we have a winner. In this case, we will let our user know with an alert and break out of the loop. Our code is now getting smart. It tells us when someone wins. But it can still do better. Stay with me. A tic-tac-toe game can also end in a tie, and in such a case, we should let the user know. To check for a tie, we're going to add some logic in our useEffect hook. The game is a tie when all the tiles have been marked and there is no winner. To check for this case, we will add a boolean variable called checkForWinner and set its value to false. Then, if we find a winner, we will set the variable to true. Now, in an if statement, we will check if we have not found a winner and that all the board tiles are filled. We will use the JavaScript function every to check that all tile values are filled. Now, within the if statement, we will use an alert to let the user know that the game is a tie. Our code is now smart enough to handle ties. Let's wrap this up with our last requirement, the reset button. To make this video look good enough for your likes, I have added some basic CSS styles. One for our top level wrapper and one for the reset button. I have then quickly updated a top level div to use these wrapper styles. Now to finish this, we will add a button element after the grid and give it the new styles. On its onClick function, we will set the board back to an empty board with 9 null values and then set the turn to X. We now have a reset button and you know how to solve this common React interview question. I really hope you found this video helpful and thank you for watching the video till the end. You can find all the code in the description below. Best of luck for your next interview.